Visits with Strange Black-Eyed Children. That's our subject tonight as we visit with David Weatherly, the author of the book Black-Eyed Children. He's next on Conundrums. This week we're talking with David Weatherly, the author of Black-Eyed Children. And David, where are you coming to us from this week?
Currently from the southwest of Arizona.
Southwest of Arizona, out there in the... Are you in the desert?
Beautiful desert country, yeah.
Man, fantastic. I've always wanted to live in the desert. I live here in South Mississippi, and so it's always hot, humid, or raining.
Well, here it's hot and dry in the summer, so...
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I got to admit also that I'm not very familiar with your book, so I'm going to get you to tell us all about the Black-Eyed Children and then some of the other things that you've had going on. You've been doing this for about 35 years, right? Studying paranormal phenomena?
That's correct. Sort of a parallel track for over 35 years now, studying and investigating paranormal phenomena as well as shamanic traditions from cultures around the world. Mm-hmm. And the two have just sort of melded together for me on a parallel track, and it's worked out very nicely.
And when you say shamanic, is that like gurus, like Indian gurus, or how do you study that?
Some of that, more. I've had a lot of native teachers from various traditions, Native American teachers, teachers from various traditions in the East, such as Tibet. And basically I go to look at the traditional, more magical traditions of the cultures that I explore.
Interesting. So how did you get involved in studying Black-Eyed Children? And what are Black-Eyed Children?
Well, two very good questions, and there's not a real short answer. The Black-Eyed Children phenomena became very well known in the late 90s, around 2000, when an internet story was posted by a journalist named Brian Bethel. Mm-hmm. And this gentleman had encountered a pair of black-eyed children in the parking lot when he went to pay a bill. Two seemingly normal children that approached his car, but they began to ask him very strange questions. They wanted to know if he could give them a ride because they had forgotten money for a movie. And he began to grow more and more nervous as he was talking to these children. He realized that the movie they were asking about was already more than half over, so none of it quite added up. And he suddenly started to feel very afraid of these children. When he suddenly realized that these two boys had completely black eyes, solid black, pupils, sclera, everything. And he ended up basically running away from these kids. His story was posted on the internet on some discussion boards at the time, and people really responded to it. Other people started posting stories. I got involved with it personally because at the time, this was around 2000, 2001, I was actively exploring all kinds of paranormal phenomena. I had heard about the Black-Eyed Children, kind of filed it away because I thought, well, this is pretty strange and it's interesting. It could be an urban legend. And it turned out that a couple of years later, I had a gentleman who approached me, and he was one of these guys that was a complete skeptic about everything. Couldn't leave the topic of the paranormal alone, however. So, he would constantly bring up, well, I don't believe in flying saucers or Bigfoot or any of that BS. And at the same time, he was one of those guys that, having done this for a lot of years, I've encountered these people many times. They constantly voice how skeptical they are, but at the same time, they've got some story that's nagging at them.
Right.
And this gentleman, he was a pretty interesting person. He was well over 6 feet tall. He was 6'3", 6'4", something like that. He was a prison guard. And finally, he caught me one day. He just happened to come into a restaurant. I was having lunch. He asked if he could join me. And we sat down and started talking. And this man finally opened up about his story. And it turned out that he had had an encounter with a pair of black-eyed children at his house. And it scared the hell out of him.
Yeah.
Now, I have to emphasize, this man was used to seeing prison brawls. He had seen people shanked. He was no slouch.
Yeah.
And he couldn't get over the fact that a pair of children had terrified him.
Wow.
And this is a common aspect of encounters with these children. They produce this level of fear in people that is overwhelming. And you were asking about exactly what a black-eyed child is. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's a child that has solid black eyes. They try to convince you to let them in your house or to let them in your car. They want to come inside. And they end up producing a fight or flight response from people. And 99% of the time is absolute fear that the people end up experiencing from encountering these kids.
What do these kids look like? I mean, are they just normal kids? They just have black eyes? Do they have special features?
Well, there are a few other things that come up in the accounts. Usually their skin is described as being either very pale. Some people describe it as looking artificial or plasticky, which harkens back to some of the Men in Black accounts. And they usually have, they seem to be pretty much divided between either being dressed very normally and nondescript in hoodies and jeans of very drab colors, grays, browns, or people will describe them as wearing old-fashioned or handmade clothing. Some people will say it looks like Amish clothing. Some people say it looks like it's hand-stitched or second-hand. So, and often ill-fitting. So those are some of the common aspects. The other common trait that comes up in these encounters is, as I stated before, these kids want something. They want to be invited inside.
So it's unlikely that this is kids just putting on black contacts and pulling a prank on someone. Whatever it is, it's an elaborate setup.
Right, and that's something I explored pretty thoroughly in the book, actually. A lot of the skeptics will jump up and down and say, well, you can buy solid black contacts and, this could all be a grand hoax. However, there are several things to examine when considering that. One is you can buy solid black contacts. They are not cheap. They range somewhere around $300 for a pair. And the other thing that happens with these kids, there are way too many occasions where these children simply disappear very quickly. There's one fascinating encounter that's in the book from a deputy sheriff who encountered a pair of black-eyed kids on the porch of a house. And this was, 2:30, 3:30 in the morning. And he had received a call for a house next door, went and took care of the call, came out and was sitting in his car and saw two children standing on the porch of this house. And thought, well, this is crazy. These kids are probably 8, 10 years old. They're standing outside at 3:30 a.m. He approached the kids. They were standing on a porch that was enclosed with a railing, and he tried to talk with them and became convinced that something was seriously wrong with these kids because they were responding very strangely. They kept insisting that they wanted to go inside and that they won't let us inside. So he opened the door, knocked on the door to rouse the people inside, and understand that he had completely blocked these kids from the steps. As long as it took him to knock on that door and turn back around, the kids had vanished.
Wow.
And he searched the yard, he searched the neighborhood, he couldn't find any sign of these kids. And that's typical of these encounters. These kids show up very suddenly, and they disappear just as suddenly.
And is it usually more than one child, or are there reports of just a single child?
Sure, there are reports of just a single child. In fact, I just got a report that I posted on my blog yesterday from a woman in Miami, Florida, who had an experience with a black-eyed child. And she was living in an executive apartment that a corporation had rented for her. Went home in the afternoon, took a nap, and fell asleep on her couch, and woke up to a noise, sat up on her couch, and realized that someone was knocking on the door. And it took her a few minutes to realize, wait, there's nobody knocking on my front door. They're knocking on the glass doors behind me. Well, she lived on the third floor.
Oh, wow.
And she turned around, and here's a young boy, probably 13 years old, standing at her glass doors, solid black eyes, knocking on the door. And, of course, it scared the hell out of her. She ran in and called the security, and they got there very quickly, claimed that they were downstairs in the parking lot anyway. Hadn't seen this child. There was no sign of this boy. The security guard, just thought, well, she must be, making this up or something to get attention, but she was absolutely convinced of what she saw.
Amazing.
Yeah, very bizarre encounters.
And what is you say it's their children? What is the general age of do they see like babies, or are they? You said 13 years old. Is that average?
Yeah, that's about average. The age range seems to be anywhere from about 8 years old up into early teens, and that's where the greater number of reports fall. Now, I do get some reports of older people, even adults that are black-eyed, and often those are very hard to follow up on. And you also get the factor in there, well, this maybe could be a hoax, because you're looking at adults who can afford to go out and spend the kind of money that we're talking about for black contacts and things like that.
Right.
And so the average range is between 8 and 13 years old.
Yeah, amazing. What do you think the black-eyed children are?
At this point, I believe that they are some type of, for lack of a better word, some type of other dimensional being, possibly akin to the jinn, that are sort of coming into our reality for whatever reason. They seem to feed almost on fear and high levels of emotional reaction from the people that they encounter. There's some evidence, too, that they are almost functioning as an omen, because a lot of people who encounter these kids have bad luck afterwards, have very strange things happen to them in the days following their encounter.
Is there anything that a person should do if they encounter one of these children?
Other than not letting them inside?
Yeah. I mean, is there some technique or something to make them go away?
Not that I'm aware of, other than disengaging them. A good portion of the people who encounter them say that these children are attempting some form of hypnosis or mind control on them. That's something I didn't mention there. Their speech is always very monotone. They don't seem to respond directly to questions. Often people try to question or engage these children and say, well, where are your parents? Why are you here? And the result is that the children simply repeat the same sentences that they've been stating the entire time. We just want to come inside. It won't take long. Just let us in. And it's very... in fact, there was one woman I interviewed who had experience with hypnosis to stop smoking. And she said that there were a lot of similarities with how she felt when these children started talking to her, and how she felt when she was put into a hypnotic state.
Wow. Has anyone ever let them in and reported what happened afterwards?
I have one account that I consider to be very valid. It's a whole chapter in the book, as a matter of fact. And it's pretty long, but essentially it was a woman who did have a situation where a child was invited in. It turned out that her son, her 10-year-old son, actually invited this black-eyed child in to their SUV. And what followed was a series of very disturbing situations for the entire family.
What happened?
Well, the husband who ended up driving the SUV was in an accident and totaled the SUV. This was moments after, maybe an hour after leaving the scene of the encounter. The young boy who had been in closest proximity to the black-eyed child became very ill, and the illness extended for quite some time. In fact, the doctors were very puzzled, because his symptoms seemed to rotate through a vast array of different things. At first, the doctors thought he had the flu. Then they thought he had something else. He exhibited symptoms that made it appear he had the measles, a stomach virus, just a whole plethora of different symptoms. And they didn't know how to treat him because it kept changing.
Right.
And the family's convinced that basically through a lot of prayer and positive thinking, they were able to help save this boy. And he did recover, so there is a good end to the story.
Mm-hmm.
But the mother is convinced that she had an encounter with something very sinister and very evil. And that's another common trait with people who encounter these kids. They often turn towards or turn back towards religion.
A religion.
Yes.
Do you think they're evil?
I think they're very sinister.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure how far I would go at this point. I haven't had a personal encounter with one, but I've certainly interviewed a lot of people who have had encounters with them. And I can tell you it causes people to do a lot of soul searching, and it causes people to get on a spiritual path one way or the other.
Is it possible they could be alien hybrids? Or have you explored that option?
That's one of the things that's explored in the book. And they do share some traits. One of the things that's fascinating about this phenomena is that the black-eyed children actually share traits with a lot of different types of paranormal phenomena. Alien hybrids, they share traits with demonic or undead entities, ghosts or spirits. But the hybrid question, that's explored pretty thoroughly in the book, and there are a fair number of people who believe that they are alien hybrids, simply because of the black eyes and the pale skin alone. Mm-hmm. That's very similar to, of course, the Greys.
Yeah.
And people who talk about witnessing alien hybrid children.
We're having some audio issues, but we'll continue. If they are alien hybrids, if they are extraterrestrial, what do you think their purpose is? Why are they doing this?
Well, it could be, some people speculate that this is simply them trying to learn how to acclimate to human behavior, mm-hmm. and how to relate to people who are fully human. Certainly, we can go back and look at some of the encounters with the men in black. And as you know, those are pretty divided. Some people believe the men in black are simply government agents. But there are a lot of men in black encounters that the MIBs are described as being very alien and very awkward in their use of English language and how they connect or relate to people. So we see some of the same things with the black-eyed children. They seem to have a lot of difficulty in understanding how to ask for what they want and how to relate to people. So it just may be it could be a testing ground for them if they are indeed some kind of alien or alien hybrid.
Your book, how long has it been out?
It came out at the beginning of March.
Okay. How far back does the earliest story you have of black-eyed children go?
Well, what I did, a lot of people initially thought that the black-eyed children were an urban legend because they were convinced that there weren't any older stories pre-1998 about the black-eyed kids. And when I started exploring this, I was convinced that it was a much older phenomenon. So what I did was I started looking at older tales and realized that it is something that goes back historically. It's just that in older stories, people weren't focused solely on the eyes.
Right.
For instance, one of the oldest accounts I believe I collected was from around 1950. And it was a pretty fascinating encounter. It was in a rural area. And it was about a young man who was walking home one afternoon. His name was Harold. Mm-hmm. Basically a farming type of community that knew everybody in the neighborhood. And Harold's strolling along back to his house, and he comes up to the fence line of his house, and here's a young boy leaning against the corner of the fence. Mm-hmm. And Harold doesn't recognize him, which is unusual because the whole community knows each other. Well, he just starts talking to this boy. And in the midst of conversation, realizes this boy's not saying anything to him, not responding. Mm-hmm. And Harold says, "Are you all right?" And this boy looks up and says, "You take me up to your house. I want to go up to your house."
Mm-hmm.
And Harold, of course, 16-year-old boy raised on the farm, he feels a chill go up his back, and he looks at this boy, and he starts thinking something's not right, and he's realized suddenly that this boy has solid black eyes.
Uh-huh.
And he gets really afraid. He realizes that he needs to run as fast as he can, and he's only thinking this. He's thinking, how fast can I run up the driveway to my house? And it seems that this boy reads his mind, because the response is very quick. "Now, don't you run away from me. You're going to walk me up to your house."
Wow.
And in the family's words, that was all it took for Harold. He set the record making it up that driveway to the house.
And it sounds like this one wasn't asking to come in. He was a little more demanding.
He was more demanding. Indeed, he was. And there are a few cases like that, but scared the heck out of Harold. And, of course, he ran and told his parents what had happened. And his father's response, of course, was to grab a shotgun and go marching down the driveway, and didn't find anything. The mother's response was, "Well, Harold met the devil, so I'm taking him down to the preacher." And that's how the story was passed down, was that this young man had met, the old Scratch, or the devil, on the road. And the focus wasn't on the black eyes, but that was definitely an aspect of this. There was one other weird thing in that case, too. As Harold was running up his driveway, he said that he heard this sound that sounded like the screech of a bobcat. Now, for anybody who's ever heard a bobcat, it's a very eerie sound.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, that just spurred him on to run even faster, I think. And, it was a very weird aspect to the story.
And I guess, they do have hair. On the front of your book, it kind of looks like they don't have hair, but they do have hair. They do look like normal children, a little lighter skin perhaps, but just odd because of the eyes. So
for the most part, they appear completely human.
Yeah. So if you just ran across one and didn't really pay attention to it, you'd just think it was some kid there, right?
That's correct. Yeah. And that actually happens in a lot of the cases. People start having an exchange with this child or these children, and don't even realize that something is amiss until they start interacting with the child. And hands down, people start getting a very odd feeling when they're talking to these children. And at some point, most of the people do recognize, the child will look directly at them, or the person will look closer at the children and realize, whoa, these kids have completely black eyes.
Do you think that they're projecting something that makes a person feel uncomfortable, or is it just the oddness of the situation in their eyes?
That's a good question, and I actually believe that they are projecting something. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do. I think they're projecting something energetically. Now, whether that's through their attempted mind control, or whether it's something energetic that we don't completely understand, they seem to produce that fight or flight response in people, and it produces a very high level of fear. And at the same time, they seem to thrive on that. So it's almost like they're feeding on it.
Mm-hmm. It's an interesting phenomenon, and apparently it's growing, right? There's becoming more and more cases of these sightings of black-eyed children.
That's correct. It looked for a long time like it was a phenomenon that was pretty much confined to the United States. Mm-hmm. But in the last several years, I've gotten more and more reports from around the world, and there do seem to be more encounters all the time.
Mm-hmm. Your latest report being that one from Miami.
That's the latest one I posted, and that one occurred, I think it was about a year ago, that this woman had this experience. But they seem to be pretty frequent.
Do you have one that's occurred like this year already?
Let me see. Yeah, I have a couple, but they're not really. There's nothing very different about them. They're just kind of standard. I saw one of these black-eyed kids in a parking lot and that type of thing.
Is it fairly widespread, or is there concentrated hotspots of reports of these things?
It seems to be pretty widespread. I think, I try to track all the different aspects of the types of people this happens to, the time of day, the time of the year, all these different things. I try to catalog all those sightings to see if there is any kind of rhythm to it. I can tell you two things. One is that there have been an awful lot of them in the Midwest.
Mm-hmm.
And other than that, as far as regions, if there's not any region that particularly stands out, I've got reports from places as diverse as Toronto, Canada, to South Africa, to Australia, and all over the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the encounters do seem to happen in the late afternoon, early evening.
Mm-hmm. Is there any? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
There are many more of them at that time of the day.
Okay. Does it cross ethnic boundaries? Are there white black-eyed children, black-eyed children, Native American black-eyed children, or do they all appear just light-skinned?
They all appear with unusual skin. Most of the time it's light, very pale in color. There are some cases where their skin is described as being olive.
Mm-hmm.
Possibly like a Mediterranean person. Now, that's kind of interesting too, because again, we refer back to some of the Men in Black reports, and that was another thing that was reported in a lot of Men in Black encounters, was that the skin was olive in color.
Interesting. And it's a fascinating phenomenon. Of course, your book, The Black-Eyed Children, where is it available now? Is it on Amazon?
It's available from leprechaunpress.com.
Okay. So if someone wanted a copy of your book, they could contact you directly, or would you autograph a book?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Okay. Absolutely. But they can go right on leprechaunpress.com and order it directly from there. There's a PayPal option on there, so if someone wants an autographed copy, they can just put something in the notes, and I'll be glad to do that for them.
Okay, excellent. And you've done a lot of other research in other phenomena, such as you do a talk on crystal skulls, right?
That's correct.
What is your take on crystal skulls? What do you think they are, and their meaning and purpose?
Wow, you asked the questions that require big answers, don't you, Jay?
Got to keep you talking.
The crystal skulls, the crystal skulls are a pretty fascinating topic. I got interested in them in the 1970s. I had a personal experience where I actually saw one that was in the keeping of a shaman in South America back in the early 80s. Mm-hmm. And that was the first time I had seen one up close and been able to hold one. And it's a pretty amazing thing. Of course, there's a native legend that says that there are 13 crystal skulls and that they were sent to diverse parts of the world, that when the earth comes to a point where it's in a great crisis, that the 13 skulls will be gathered back together because they hold information that is vital to the survival of humanity. Now, some people scoff at that, and I like to point out that, a tiny crystal can hold a vast amount of information.
Yes.
And is used in a lot of our modern technology. So if something the size of a human skull that's a piece of crystal held information, can you imagine how much it would hold?
Exactly. And most of these skulls have been found scattered around the world. How many skulls do we have now that we know of their location, and where are they?
That's really hotly debated. There are several here in the United States. Of course, the most famous being what's called the Mitchell-Hedges skull. And that was held by Anna Mitchell-Hedges until she passed away a couple years ago at the ripe old age of like 101, I think, that she accredited to the skull. So that one's here in the States. There's a couple of others that have been documented as being authentic. There's one called Shana Ra. And there's a really fascinating one that was just found last year, as a matter of fact. And I love this story. It was found in Europe by a Swiss journalist who got busy tracking down artifacts from World War II. And what he found was a little old lady living in a house who had been married to a Nazi SS officer. And she was still living in the same place. He had some meetings with her and ended up discovering that on a roof beam in the house, there sat a crystal skull that apparently had sat there since 1945 or so. There was some documentation with it that indicated one of the notations said collection Ron. Now, anybody who's a historian knows that Otto Ron was a SS officer who some people claim was the inspiration for Indiana Jones. He was essentially the head of what loosely interprets as the occult bureau for the Nazis. He went all over the world looking for mystical artifacts for Hitler because that was one of Hitler's fascinations. So he collected this skull somewhere in South America, brought it back to Germany. The story seems to indicate that this particular Nazi SS officer was charged with the keeping of this skull to try to get it back into Berlin as the Allies were invading. Left it at his house, hidden, and it's sat there since that time. And it's an amazing looking skull. It's currently undergoing tests to prove its authenticity. But I feel pretty confident that it's an authentic skull.
Is there any indication as to where in South America that he found the skull?
There's not at this point, no.
So there's...
But, they were meticulous record keepers, so it's very possible that we could find out exactly where that one came from.
There may be records in some other vault, some other hall or something, somewhere else that they kept records.
That's correct.
Are there records of his expeditions, of places that he went to?
Yes, there are.
I'm sorry, where?
Yes, there are records of a lot of the pieces that Ron collected and where exactly he collected them from.
All right. So a study of that, and we may not know until it's been fully researched, but we may be able to find out exactly where he received that skull. So in total, how many skulls now do we have?
Depending on who you talk to, anywhere from about 7 or 9 to all 13. Some people were touting that this one that was found in Bavaria last year was the 13th skull. And when you look around at the condition that the world is experiencing right now, then this very well may be the crisis point that a lot of native legends were talking about.
What is the story that when all 13 skulls are brought together, what's going to happen?
There's not a lot of details about that. It essentially says that they will be brought together, and once they're together, we'll be able to access the information that's held by the skulls, and that essentially it will guide mankind to a new level of consciousness. And of course, at this point, it ties in with a lot of the 2012 legends, and the idea of a shift in consciousness that we possibly are facing this year.
Is there any effort being made to determine who all has the various skulls and to bring them together to one location?
There have been a few efforts. Some of the skulls have been brought together at various times for gatherings over the last few years. The issue is you're dealing with a lot of personalities that all have their own ideas about how things should unfold. So that in itself is a challenge, I think, that the skulls face to come together. Getting beyond their keepers, so to speak.
Absolutely. December 21st, 2012, what do you think is going to happen?
I think we're all going to still be here to celebrate Christmas, I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
I think that, there's a lot of confusion about the Mayan calendar and exactly what it means. I don't think it's the end of the world. Yeah. I think that we are facing some pretty dramatic turning points in this world's evolution, and that we need to start approaching things at a new level of consciousness and with a new level of compassion so that we can move forward into 2013. And I really think that, the calendar doesn't actually end. There are other calendars that go beyond that with the Mayans. And it's just the way they keep the records. It signifies an end of a particular cycle. And I don't think we should fear that at this point. I think we should all probably be pretty happy if we get past this cycle that we're in right now and let it in and go on to something better.
Absolutely. In your study of the shamans and their teachings, is there anything that's related to this idea that we're in a changing point, a point of time that the Mayans thought time maybe was going to end, but are we in I guess what I'm trying to say is a shift in something that's happening now?
There's a lot of indications in that, and prophecies from around the world, and not just from shamanic cultures, but even if we look at some of the prophets like Nostradamus, Edgar Cayce, it's all about reaching a point where we have to go through a transformation in consciousness in order to survive and to move forward as a people. So I think we're seeing a lot of things come together. It's very fascinating because different, depending on your spiritual view, you can find a way to interpret it. Conservative Christians can interpret it as the end times. New Agers can interpret it as Casey's prophecies of the great transformation and the earth changes. And I definitely think that we're seeing that. I mean, the earth is becoming more active. There's massive increases in earthquakes and volcanoes. The weather patterns are going crazy. And we are at some kind of an end point, and that essentially means that we're approaching a beginning of something new.
Mm-hmm. Do you think it's going to get worse before it gets better?
Unfortunately, I do, yes.
Mm-hmm. So we're going to see more.
We're in the midst of that now.
Yeah, see more earthquakes, more volcanoes, more tsunamis, possibly even a nuclear, issue again, such as the one in Japan. When do you think we will pass through this and we'll be into a going down the downhill slide, so to speak, getting away from it?
Well, it's interesting because I think there's some variation in that. I like to say that humans have much more say in this matter than we commonly accept we do. When en masse we project energy into a particular thing unfolding in a certain way, we help co-create it. And there's a lot of energy and fear being put into 2012.
Right.
And just by default, it may bring us to an end point at the end of this year and help us move beyond, because I think a lot of people are going to be very surprised, genuinely surprised, when we all wake up for, Christmas.
Right.
Just 22nd.
We wake up on the 22nd and nothing happened. And the whole world will kind of go, whew, like we dodged, like we dodged a bullet or something. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, you've done so many different things in so many different fields. We've talked about the black-eyed children and crystal skulls. Let's shift over to ufology and anything that you've done in that field. And are you maybe working on a book or something in the field of ufology?
I'm not working on I've got several projects on the table. I don't have a ufology book on the table right now that I'm working on now.
Okay.
But, it's something that I've worked out. I tend to, because I've done this for so many years, when I started in the paranormal field, it was interesting because, for one thing, people weren't very open-minded about it. We didn't have the mass numbers of paranormal shows on television, and people weren't chopping at the bit to tell their ghost story or tell about their UFO sighting. So it took a lot of work and a lot of effort back then to talk to people and get stories out of them and learn about their encounters. Now it's the opposite. We're kind of overwhelmed with everybody's got a story. So, we have to deal with that difference at this point. But because I started in the field so early, I mean, when I used to say paranormal, people assumed that it meant, haunted sites, UFOs, Bigfoot, all of it. Now you say paranormal, and unfortunately, because of some of the television shows, people think it means strictly ghost, and
Right.
it doesn't. I really believe that we have to look at paranormal events together, collectively, because there are hotspots around the world that have a large number of different phenomena occurring. And I think we have to look at it holistically so we can begin to understand more about what this phenomena actually is and what it means. So I tend to look at everything when I look at those things. It's funny because I joke that I had an incredible report I got from Utah. I went and interviewed these people who had had an encounter with Bigfoot. And Bigfoot showed up in their backyard. He was walking in their garden. They had all these details about sighting this, what they believed was a Sasquatch. And there was something about the case that just nagged at me a little bit. I couldn't quite put it together. It was an older couple. They came off as being completely honest and very concerned and just wanting to know that somebody knew that this, creature was in their yard. Finally, I realized what was missing. And after several interviews, I asked this question several times, and I finally got around to it again. I said, I just want to know what it is that caused you to get up at that time of the morning, because you're telling me that you didn't hear this creature making noises until you were up, looking out the windows and observing him. So what was it that caused you to get up? And they hemmed and hawed, and I said, if it's something personal, if it's something medical, anything else, just I can discard this. Well, no, it's not that. And finally, after beating around the bush, they got around to telling me, well, we saw lights. Wait a minute, what do you mean you saw lights? Well, we saw lights from overhead and we thought it was an airplane. Okay, you thought it was an airplane. Well, what, did you observe an airplane? Well, the long and short is they saw a UFO.
Right.
And they were so upset that they had seen a UFO at the same time they saw a Bigfoot. And I said, why didn't you tell me this at the beginning? Well, we didn't want anybody to think we were nuts. Okay.
Apparently, seeing a Bigfoot, you're not nuts. Seeing a UFO, you are, right?
It's fine to report a Bigfoot, but if you're talking about UFOs, you might be nuts.
Maybe they thought it was just a little overwhelming to have these two strange things happen, together.
Right.
Yeah. But so they were up because they see a UFO, and then they hear something. They go outside. There's a Bigfoot walking around in their backyard. Well, yeah, I guess that would kind of make you go, So what became of the case? Where does it stand now?
It's still open. It's something I'm still looking at. These people, the lights had come through the bedroom window is what happened, and the light was so bright that it caused them to get up to see what was happening. They didn't know if it was, a helicopter or what was happening. They didn't hear any noise, and they went outside and they observed this craft over their house. And they live in a very rural area. And in the midst of this, they saw this creature that was lit up because of the UFO. Right. And it was, standing in their garden and walking through their garden. And, it's something that's still open. I think that there actually are a lot of reports of people seeing a Sasquatch or Bigfoot-like creature around the same time that there are UFO sightings in the area. Now, the issue is that MUFON, the largest UFO reporting organization in the country, they don't want to hear about it if you saw a Bigfoot at the same time you saw a UFO. Over to the Bigfoot organizations, they think you're nuts if you're reporting a UFO at the same time you saw a Bigfoot. And I'm not saying that Bigfoot's dropping out of UFOs or anything like that.
Right.
It could be something else entirely, but I think we have to look at it. We have to look at the whole of these reports and begin to understand, well, what is it that's causing this strange phenomenon? For all I know, it could be something that's creating some kind of hallucinations. Or there's any number of possibilities, but until we explore it and really examine and investigate it all, we're not going to have the answers if we're only looking at part of the puzzle.
Right. And some people, including me, most of the time, I tend to not want to put all my mysteries in one basket, because then they get all sort of confused together. Keep them separated and study one thing along with the other. And agreed. You know, the UFO community, they don't want to hear about Bigfoot. Bigfoot community, they don't want to hear about UFOs. Recently in October in Pennsylvania, there was a UFO and Bigfoot conference where the two were brought together, and I thought it went very well. Do you think that we're seeing a sort of a merging of the paranormal where ghost hunters, Bigfoot hunters, UFO hunters can all kind of come together and agree or agree to disagree?
Yeah, I sure do. I think just in my time in the field, I think I'm seeing it come full circle because initially in the 70s, people looked at these things more holistically. I think what divided it was a lot of politics, a lot of the organizations that become much larger and more popular and, wanted to create a more focused agenda. There's good and bad to that. But I do think that we're reaching a point where people are starting to cooperate more. I'm seeing a lot of crossover with more people that are interested in different aspects of the field and are more willing to listen to different possibilities and theories. So I definitely think we're coming back around to that once again. And it's a good thing. I think we'll finally start getting some answers.
Do you, in mentioning your the shamans again, do you practice these magic? Do you practice magic?
I practice shamanic traditions, yes.
What would some of those traditions be? What are some of the things that you do in your belief?
Well, it's quite honestly, it's more of a lifestyle. I feel like I lead a much more spiritual life as opposed to a dogmatic religious life, and it's a lot of being aware and conscious, both of the people and the world around you. And I think that'll get us a long way, regardless of... I've explored a lot of different religions and spiritual traditions, and I'm pretty open to all of them, to tell you the truth.
Right. Okay. 35 years of exploring the paranormal. You do conferences as well. What's on your calendar for 2012? Where are you going to be?
Wow, let's see. The next thing coming up is I'll be at the Alamo UFO conference at the end of May. And I'll be speaking about the crystal skulls there. I'll be at a huge show in Sacramento, California in June. That's the Sacramento UFO Paranormal Summit. And that's just an amazing lineup of people. Bill Murphy, a friend of mine from Sci-Fi's Fact of Fake, will be there. Paul Bradford from GHI. Anthony Sanchez, author of UFO Highway. And just a veritable who's who of people in the paranormal and UFO field. That's going to be an amazing conference. Let's see, I'll be at the Wake Up Now conference in Albuquerque, New Mexico later in the year. And a couple of other things that are still haven't verified yet, but I'm pretty much all over the place. And you can find me all over the internet too.
Yeah, and speaking of on the internet, how would someone find your website? What's your web address?
Sure, they can check out Two Crows Paranormal at blogspot.com. That's my blog. And that's really a good gateway to find me. You can find the links from my Facebook page and my other sites on there. And you can also order the book from leprechaunpress.com. Those are the two best sites to find me on the internet. I'm on Facebook and Twitter and everything else too.
Be sure.
People are free to network with me and friend request me and so forth.
Yeah, find David on Facebook. You have a Twitter account as well?
I do. It's Two Crows Para.
Okay. Yeah, and definitely want to hook up with David, and especially if you want to read the book or you have questions about the book. It's called Black-Eyed Children, written by David Weatherly, and available now, so you can purchase it and read it on your Kindle, read it on your portable device, or read it in book form. Do you have it in electronic publication form?
I don't yet. It's just in traditional paperback form at this point.
Okay. All right. Well, maybe that's coming. David, thank you so much for being my guest on Conundrums this week.
Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it.
And we will see you next time on Conundrums.
Having done this for a lot of years, I've encountered these people many times. They constantly voice how skeptical they are, but at the same time, they've got some story that's nagging at them.
Right.
And this gentleman, he was a pretty interesting person. He was well over 6 feet tall. He was 6'3", 6'4", something like that. He was a prison guard. And finally, he caught me one day. He just happened to come into a restaurant. I was having lunch. He asked if he could join me. And we sat down and started talking. And this man finally opened up about his story. And it turned out that he had had an encounter with a pair of black-eyed children at his house. And it scared the hell out of him. Yeah. Now, I have to emphasize, this man was used to seeing prison brawls. He had seen people shanked. He was no slouch.
Yeah.
And he couldn't get over the fact that a pair of children had terrified him. Wow. And this is a common aspect of encounters with these children.
Visits with strange black-eyed children. That's our subject tonight as we visit with David Weatherly, the author of the book Black-Eyed Children. He's next on Conundrums. This week we're talking with David Weatherly, the author of Black-Eyed Children. And David, where are you coming to us from this week?
Currently from the southwest of Arizona.
Southwest of Arizona, out there are you in the desert?
Beautiful desert country, yeah.
Man, fantastic. I've always wanted to live in the desert. I live here in South Mississippi, and so it's always hot, humid, or rainy.
Well, here it's hot and dry in the summer, so.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I got to admit also that I'm not very familiar with your book, so I'm going to get you to tell us all about the black-eyed children and then some of the other things that you've had going on. You've been doing this for about 35 years, right? Studying paranormal phenomena?
That's correct. Sort of a parallel track for over 35 years now, studying and investigating paranormal phenomena as well as shamanic traditions from cultures around the world. Mm-hmm. And the two have just sort of melded together for me on a parallel track, and it's worked out very nicely.
When you say shamanic, is that like gurus, like Indian gurus, or how do you study that?
Some of that, more. I've had a lot of native teachers from various traditions, Native American teachers from various traditions in the East, such as Tibet. And basically I go to look at the traditional, more magical. These two boys had completely black eyes, solid black, pupil, sclera, everything. And he ended up basically running away from these kids. His story was posted on the internet on some discussion boards at the time, and people really responded to it. Other people started posting stories. I got involved with it personally because at the time, this was around 2000, 2001, I was actively exploring all kinds of paranormal phenomena. I had heard about the black-eyed children, kind of filed it away because I thought, well, this is pretty strange and it's interesting. It could be an urban legend. And it turned out that a couple of years later, I had a gentleman who approached me, and he was one of these guys that was a complete skeptic about everything. Couldn't leave the topic of the paranormal alone, however.
Yeah.
So, he would constantly bring up, well, I don't believe in flying saucers or Bigfoot or any of that BS. And at the same time, he was one of those guys that traditions of the cultures that I explore.
Interesting. So how did you get involved in studying black-eyed children? And what are black-eyed children?
Well, two very good questions, and there's not a real short answer. The black-eyed children phenomena became very well known in the late 90s, around 2000, when an internet story was posted by a journalist named Brian Bethel. And this gentleman had encountered a pair of black-eyed children in the parking lot when he went to pay a bill. two seemingly normal children that approached his car, but they began to ask him very strange questions. They wanted to know if he could give them a ride because they had forgotten money for a movie. And he began to grow more and more nervous as he was talking to these children. He realized that the movie they were asking about was already more than half over, so none of it quite added up. And he suddenly started to feel very afraid of these children. When he suddenly realized that